This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Go to our website at wdtatpodcast.com and click on support to learn how you can be part of this effort to learn how to have better conversations, increase compassion, and build bridges, not walls. You can make a one-time donation or become a patron for as little as $1 a month and receive patron-only benefits. Thanks to all of our patrons at any level for your support. We really couldn't do this without you. Now let's get into the interview. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about things we're not supposed to, learn how to have difficult conversations, and talk to people about what makes them different. This is the We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land podcast, where we do talk about that with me, Lucas Land.
It's never the right place or time. It's imperceptible to the eye. It's never the right place or time.
My guest today is me. It's just me. It's myself. I thought end of 2020, end of the year is a good time to reflect a little bit and talk to you all. So if you listen to this podcast primarily to hear voices other than mine, then this is one that you probably want to skip. But I thought it would be a good chance to tell a bit of my own story and reflect on this project that we call We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land. And look towards the future, too. What does 2021 have in store, and what am I hoping to do with the podcast in the future? So, here we go. I've probably, hinted and through interviews at lots of little details about myself and my own life, but I wanted to share a little bit about who I am as your host and the one doing, a fair amount of the talking. I try to share the mic pretty well, but as my wife will tell you, I love to talk. I don't think there's a lot of people who have podcasts who don't love to talk. I grew up in rural Texas. You can listen to the episode with Mary Beth Kendrick to hear a little bit more about the town that I'm from. And left, I remember I had never left the state of Texas, and I had never flown on a plane until I decided to become a Rotary Exchange student after high school. And my family drove me to Houston. Those were the days where, the TSA, I guess it didn't exist. I don't know the history of airline security, but you could go back with people who were going to fly and wait at the gate with them to say goodbye to them. So I remember my whole family going with me to the gate, and I got on a plane to fly to Denmark, where I lived in for a year as an exchange student. So, as a 17, 18-year-old kid, really, like my world suddenly got a lot bigger. That was a pretty important experience, I think, as anybody who has lived for extensive periods of time in another country, another culture, will attest that there's a lot of growth and learning that happens when you do that, and especially as a kid who hadn't ever left the state of Texas. So when I got back, I went to college. I went to Texas Lutheran University and studied music. I'd always loved music, and so I studied music. But I also took a lot of theology and philosophy classes and just really enjoyed those challenging questions in both fields, and really enjoyed it a lot more than I probably did the music. Sorry, professors who were always giving me a hard time about taking too many extracurriculars. And then I worked in ministry. I was a youth minister for, I don't remember, 4 or 5 years in a couple different places. And I remember during that time, well, let me back up a little bit. I worked at this camp in Colorado called Sky Ranch Lutheran Camp one summer, and they have I don't know if it was kind of founded by like Jesus freak Lutherans in the 70s or what. That's kind of the story I have in my head. But all of the cabins were named after these like social justice heroes, Martin Luther King, and then more like obscure people like Lech Walesa. They had, I think they had Gandhi. I'm not remembering all of the names of the cabins. That was quite a while ago. And so this was like the first time really that I had encountered faith that was social justice was part of what it meant to be a Christian and to be a faithful follower of Jesus. And so that was huge and changed a lot of things, ways that I thought about things as far as faith and the world and what our place in the world is. And then after college, when I was doing youth ministry, it was about around in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s when the emerging church was a big deal. If you're a Christian nerd, you might know about that. Postmodern theology. I remember I was on like a listserv. I'm pretty sure it was like an email thing where you emailed your responses or like a digest. You could go online, but you got like an email digest of it. I don't remember if it was like a Google group. Anyways, I'm dating myself. Asking lots of questions about culture and epistemology. How do we know what we know? And really wrestling with a lot of things. And I've always been very opinionated, and I'm a Enneagram 1, if there are any Enneagram nerds listening, which means that I'm a perfectionist and that I also pretty much think I'm right all the time. And in a really unhealthy way like that, that means that I could argue about stuff all day long and argue that I'm right, even if I don't actually believe what I'm saying, maybe, because being right feels really good to me, I guess. So, hopefully I've gotten over some of that through the years, which is part of the story, how I ended up kind of making this podcast. So always been interested in asking questions. When I got married in 2003, we decided to move back to Texas. We were living in Chicago at the time and wanted to be closer to family. And I got a job working at a church in Killeen, Texas. And Killeen, Copper's Cove, that area is home of the world's largest military installation, Fort Hood. And I considered myself like that I believed in nonviolence, going along with Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, and all of these social justice heroes that I had been learning about. Nonviolence seemed to me like the way of Jesus. I didn't necessarily have a really smart way to articulate that or a very like robust theology. It just seemed to be right to me. And so I moved to this military community where I worked in a church where everyone was connected to the military, retired military, almost everyone. There were a few families who lived and worked in that area that had no connection necessarily to the military except living in a military community. So, I mean, you can imagine, on the one hand, it was really challenging because there were some basic things that I disagreed with 99% of the population in my town about, and even in the church that I worked in, and there were conflicts about that when I would push back on the church wanting to do things because it's the way the military did them and the way that people were used to, and that didn't necessarily win me a lot of friends in that church. unfortunately, I guess. But I probably also was not very good at navigating how to disagree well or how to talk about those things in a way that maybe people could hear me more. So I also made some really, really good friends that remain friends to this day that I'm very different. And I hope to have one of them on the show sometime to have one of those harder conversations for you all for an episode. And that taught me a lot about humanizing people that I didn't agree with, right? I mean, previously, military families and soldiers, I didn't know any, and so it seemed abstract to me. And getting to know them helped me understand that they are in the middle of that struggle of, if I believe in nonviolence, and that they're also victims of violence and that sort of system that's perpetuating violence in the world, and not necessarily the enemy, I guess, is what, branding whoever I disagreed with as the enemy, or they're on the wrong side, right? Because they're in the military and I didn't agree with that. It helped me to see them as human beings, to understand their stories, why they're in the military, all of those different things. And there's lots of different reasons. So started, unraveling some of my, as I said, like proclivities to think that I'm always right, and that people should probably listen to my opinion for whatever reason, So after I left that church, I went to seminary because I enjoyed theology, as I said before, and wanted to continue studying. And in seminary, I've mentioned this, I think, on maybe one or two episodes. I distinctly remember, being in disagreements in class with my fellow classmates about something, and there was at least one, maybe two instances that I can remember feeling uncomfortable with how I responded. Like, even though I felt like I was right and I wanted to push back on something, I did it in a way that was trying to dominate the other person, to get them to see things my way. And really realizing that I needed to do some work to unpack what that was about and what I needed to work on to be healthier, because the instance I'm thinking was, a good friend, somebody that I cared about, that I respected, but that I used a real zinger to try and like cut them down, but it was in a way that wasn't thoughtful, wasn't caring, wasn't curious. It was just like almost like a go for the throat kind of feeling. And I hope that others can identify with that and see that is something that a lot of us might have in us that we don't like, right? But we do it to maybe protect ourselves and to cope with certain things. And then after seminary, we moved to this farm with two little kids. We sold our house and took a crazy leap, and began a kind of a journey with intentional community, where we were learning more about what that meant and what that looked like, and began building some really deep relationships and friendships, and then also kind of talking about and learning what it meant to make commitments to each other in a community, kind of for good or for bad, to really merge our lives with another group of people that we connected with, identified with, and saw, as a community that was trying at least to live out the same things that we valued. And so then through the intentional community, I think I've maybe shared pieces of this. We have friends that are great friends that we would say to each other, that we would probably never be friends if it hadn't been for the community that we're a part of. And so working through some really hard conversations about things we disagreed about, you know, I don't want to tell the whole story, but there was this whole disagreement about baptism. Our community doesn't really have a whole lot of like doctrines that you got to believe all of these exact sort of same things. But as an Anabaptist community, one of the few things we really do commit to is we don't baptize babies in our community. Now, if you were baptized as a baby and you join the community, your baptism is accepted by our community. But we were having our third child and wanted to baptize them as a baby because that was what we had done for the other kids, because our family was kind of a mix of, you know, all of these different denominations we had been a part of, and then we were in a Baptist seminary. I mean, it was just a mishmash. So we kind of created our own ritual, and we wanted to do the same thing. Anyways, this created conversation about us, you know, joining the community, but we weren't wanting to do this. We were wanting to do something else, and some people didn't care, and other people cared a lot, and we had so many conversations, really hard conversations. We invited people over for dinner to talk about why this is important to them, you know, and understand from their perspective, and try to also share from our perspective. And so growing in this community is another practice of like learning how to talk to each other, how to live together in deeper ways, and kind of get past that first thin layer of the surface level of relationships to really trying to live life together, right? And I don't need to have that kind of relationship with everyone I know, but having those deeper relationships and getting through those harder things and harder conversations teaches you a lot about yourself and a lot about those other people. And the last thing I wanted to share is that I, you know, have had convictions for a long time about things like a lot of different things related to sustainability. In college, it really started, again, with that camp that I worked at where social justice, I also encountered vegetarians. And as like a Texas born and raised like red-blooded male, I did not know what to make of people who didn't eat meat. But I was also intrigued, and so I decided as an experiment, the Christmas after that summer, I told my family that I was going to be vegetarian, and then I was for 9 years. I read a book on a plane to Japan to visit my then girlfriend, called Fast Food Nation by Eric Schlosser. And that kind of sealed it for me. I said, well, there's so many reasons to be vegetarian. I'm just going to stick with it until I can figure out something else. That kind of started my journey thinking about, you know, what I ate and where it came from. And that kind of led to more, you know, environmental questions and ecology and what are we doing to the earth? How are we taking care of it? What are the problems with the way we've kind of organized life that are damaging to the planet, right? So I also ended up getting involved in some activism. There's a future episode in which I talked to Joanna Lawrence Shank about dialogue and activism. That makes me nervous about even using the word. That's a teaser. It's coming in 2021. But sustainability issues in my community in Waco, Texas. And at the time, there was kind of rumors or some talk that a new gas plant was going to be built in our community, and a lot of people were not happy about that. And the environmental folks that I knew that worked on things related to climate change, you know, we're trying to organize. And so, you know, I went to some meetings and I started to get involved, and pretty early on, just encountered some of the worst aspects of activism. A lot of people get involved in activism for a cause because they know that it's the right thing to do, but that can also become self-righteousness and very egotistical. And then it's really hard to work with. I mean, probably anybody who's worked in activist circles and worked on those kinds of campaigns for change, no matter whether it's policy or I don't know, different campaigns, stopping pipelines or stopping construction of something, whatever. There's a lot of ego involved, and there's lots of things out there about the kind of darker side of activism, and I saw some of that. Egos having conflict and not being willing to work with each other, and just a lot of negative stuff. And it was not a great experience. At the same time, when I was working on that, I was really into things like what is it called? It's from the UK. It's the town movement. Oh, I'm going to think of the name as I'm explaining it. But the idea of that movement is in your community, the answers to the problems in your community are already present. And so you just need to get the right people at the table and have the conversations and be willing to listen to each other and maybe work through kind of a process, but to find the solutions for what can make your community better, related to all kinds of things, more bike lanes or better recycling or all of those different things. And so I got, I loved that idea, and that got me involved in things like public deliberation. I had Erin Pacer Oath on the podcast with her episode because she was leading public deliberation at Baylor, trying to figure out how do we talk about these problems differently. And then I also got involved in a city committee on sustainability because Waco is a community that's small enough that it's not that hard to get involved, and but big enough that there's a lot of good things to work on. And the city, I can't remember what year this was working on their next 40-year plan. So this is a huge plan to set direction for the city, a big undertaking. And I went to some of the meetings. I read through the draft of the plan, and I had some thoughts, especially around the areas of sustainability, energy, that I thought, hey, we can do, we can make some changes. We can put some language in that says, hey, we want to move in a certain direction. And so I showed up at a meeting, and this guy who had worked for the city for 40 years was retired, but he came back to kind of help with this project, was at the meeting, and I talked to him and said, hey, this is really cool. I had a few thoughts, and, I'd love to share them with you. And he gave me his card and his email and said, yeah, send them to me. And I was like, cool. And so I sent him some of my ideas, and then, months later, I get an email with a draft plan that had highlighted the changes, and my changes were in there, and it was things about renewable, the city moving towards renewable energy, those sorts of things. And it's not like that solved all the problems, but what it really showed me was showing up and sometimes just talking to the right people can get a lot done. Whereas a lot of the activists that I was encountering were all about this sort of adversarial version of activism. And there's a place for that. And I wholeheartedly support protests and marches to make change. And it's proven to be effective in a lot of cases. But the flip side is sometimes sitting down and talking to somebody is all it takes to get something changed. something as big as statements in your city plan about renewable energy with the city. So anyways, so I hope that all, telling a little bit more of my story makes sense why I would start a podcast, trying to talk about things that are difficult, trying to find ways for us to work on skills and ideas and tips and tricks, techniques about engaging other people differently, engaging them in a way that leads us to our best selves, to understand each other better, and, really more humanity, I think, more compassion, as I, talk about in the intro every time. So I reflecting on the little over a year of the podcast, my hopes and dreams for this podcast were really just to have some conversations. I realized that I knew so many really cool and interesting people, and I've met so many more cool and interesting people through the podcast. But I wanted to talk about things, have conversations. I love doing that. It's something that gives me a lot of energy in life. But something that I think putting it out there helps other people maybe feel more comfortable with topics that they are uncomfortable with. Maybe that's LGBTQ identities, and you don't know where to start and you don't know how to begin. So having somebody else talk about it, answer some of your questions, starts giving you maybe a little more comfort with it. The same with all the other things we've talked about. And then learning to have some tools and techniques like nonviolent communication. That was my first episode, and I probably should go back to that and talk about that more. Those things, those ideas, those frameworks can help us have better conversations and increase compassion. The work that we do internally that happens in some of those things makes a huge difference in how we have conversations with each other. I know that if I'm not doing the work to be mindful, paying attention to the things that I need to work on, I'm going to have bad conversations. I'm going to have like reactions and negative experiences and conversations. Doesn't mean that those aren't still hard conversations, but hopefully I'll have more capacity and more tools in my belt to really try and do it the best I can. And the thing that I've barely scratched the surface of that I do want to do more of, but as I've said multiple times, I'm a coward and it's hard. And I'm doing it in public and putting it out. And I want it to be beneficial and not just sensational, the way that, the talking heads and pundits set up conversations to just be a battle, and that we kind of get to watch a gladiatorial death match, verbal death match. I want it to be something different. And so I'm also nervous about doing it because I'm worried about what it turns into. But I do want to have hard conversations in front of you, the listeners. And I'm hoping that we can practice good conversations by getting it wrong and then doing better, and reflecting on it. I did that with my friend Gary. It was kind of a softball, but it was good. And early on, there were episodes that were really hard for me. The hardest episodes that I have done, one was with my friend, the Reverend Sam Doyle, because we did disagree a lot. And I was nervous about wanting to make sure I said the right things, or that I could talk about it in a way that was both respectful of Sam and the fact that we didn't agree, but also felt like I could stand up for my convictions and talk about it in a way that I felt honored, both sides, I guess. Anyways, it's really hard. I did an episode with a filmmaker about abortion in Argentina, and that was hard. I think it was a good episode, but it made me begin to think about how often these conversations are with people I tend to probably agree with more than disagree. And so I tried to take the other side a bit and I'm always in my mind having the other side play out, people who are listening who don't agree with whatever is being said. Maybe I agree and me and the guest are in sync, but what if somebody's listening to this who doesn't agree with it? How are they going to respond? And how do I honor the differences without making it into something where like on news channels where you always have to have the other side necessarily? Like that's not what I want. I don't want everybody to get equal airtime. I know Joe Rogan is willing to have Alex Jones on his podcast, and probably if Alex Jones wanted to come on my podcast, that would blow up ratings, right? I mean, that I had somebody like him on this podcast, but it would be antithetical to everything I think I believe about this project to give a platform to something that seems just intended to create fear and division and isn't engaging in a like honest way really about the conversation, I would say. And I'd like to have some conversations with folks who disagree with me about that or think where I draw the line is not where the line should be drawn, right? Because I know that not everyone does think that, and not everyone is necessarily saying Alex Jones should be on my show, but that they would draw the line in a different place from me. And how do I negotiate that then? I don't know. These are good questions. I also had it was a great conversation with Mary Beth Kendrick from my hometown. But again, it was one of the episodes where I was in a conversation with somebody where I disagreed with a lot of things that she was saying and struggled. I struggled so much with do I really tackle that and start explaining why I disagree, or what are the things I want to go deep on and really like tackle, and what are the things we tend to tackle, the things that are surface level. Like she and I disagree about politics, and so we could have had a whole conversation about Trump and about politics and some of those things, and maybe it would have been a really good conversation, but I also feel like we wouldn't have gotten to some of the good places we got in that conversation. And so it's a bit of a trade-off, and that's really, really tricky. And I think we're all doing that in our own lives with people that we disagree with. We're making trade-offs about, do I talk about this or do I not talk about this? What am I going to choose to respond to, and what do I not choose to respond to? And those are really difficult questions, and I want to continue kind of probing that and talking about that. Some of the things that made those particular conversations hard is not responding to everything that someone says. And when someone says something that we disagree with, I think there's two things. There's one, reaction that is, I'm right, they're wrong, and I need to correct them so that they understand that they're wrong, right? And that's maybe the more negative. The other feeling is, I think I need to stand up for this. I feel like what they're saying is unjust. Maybe it's racist or misogynist, or there's something that they're saying that I feel like I can't just let slide because it's dangerous and hurtful. And then how do I bring that up? And am I just avoiding responding because I'm worried about that? you know. The other thing is that allowing people to say things that don't represent me or my views, or maybe that I feel like misrepresent other people's views, those are hard things to let slide. And sometimes I've probably done that because I wanted to get to something that I thought was more important. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should have spoken up, you know, but I did my best. And that gets to the last thing. There's a lot of pressure to get it right. And there's a lot of talk out in the world on social media about a lot of the justice issues going on. And there's a lot of calling out of people that they didn't get it right, you know, and canceling people because they didn't get it right. And I don't necessarily know that I'm like 100% believe that there's a cancel culture necessarily, but there is a lot of conversation about how to respond, what are the right ways to respond, correcting each other, learning more, you know, being more, growing, and a lot of those things are important. But it also highlights that we're not going to get it right, and it goes back to what I was talking about in activism, that when the ego is involved and it becomes about self-righteousness, we can be pretty much guaranteed, I think, that it's not coming from a good place. So yeah, I want to get it right. I want to do better. I want to try and talk about things in a way that's respectful to other people, that's curious and compassionate. But I can also want to get it right so bad that I don't try and I don't put it out there. So that's a bit of my kind of reflections. Those are all, you know what? I just realized those are all pretty negative reflections about episodes. There's so many episodes that I loved that were positive and just inspired me and gave me, you know, new books to add to my list and new little nuggets of wisdom that I've held on to, you know. You know, I think of my episode with Christina Gibson about addiction and recovery, and talking about sitting with each other in our pain, you know, that we're uncomfortable with communal pain. We're uncomfortable with that. And what does it look like when we're willing to kind of show up for each other and share that together and share those burdens. Yeah, little nuggets like that I think are really wonderful and have been helpful to me and hopefully helpful to others. So, looking towards 2021, I want to share a few things that I am hopeful about and excited about with the podcast and what is coming. One of the things that I want to do more of and work on with the podcast, as I said before, is doing these practice makes better episodes. I don't yet have that figured out, and I'm working on that, but I want to have more of these episodes where we're not just talking about hard things, or we're not just talking about topics, but that there's a question and two people that disagree on what the answer to that question is, that are going to have a conversation and then reflect on how that conversation went, what worked and what didn't, what was hard, what made it easier. And hopefully, you know, out of that, we can all kind of learn some things to help us when those things come up, and how to do that better. I'm excited to announce that I've been asked to join a podcast network. It's called That's Not Canon Productions. They're based out of Brisbane, Australia. I don't know why. I mean, I had Steve McDonald on the podcast. I don't know if I've had any other Australians. Had a lot of British folks, but I'm excited to join the network and hopefully contribute. And you'll hear promos from other shows, and they'll be promoting We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land. And so hopefully that's a step towards growing the podcast, growing the audience, and I'm excited about that. I love that this network is really grassroots and is really all about supporting independent podcasters and helping grow shows and helping support each other. And I really love that. So, yeah, look for that, and you'll hear more promos from other shows on the podcast. I do have some plans and hopes for growing our community of supporters. That's a hard thing to do, and it takes time. And I moved from South America to North America in the middle of this year, plus starting a new full-time job and a pandemic, and the list goes on. We all have those lists. But really, what makes this possible, I love doing it and learn so much. And as long as I'm enjoying it, I want to keep doing it. But it does cost me some money and time. And so being able to recoup some of that through our Patreon is really helpful. So I would really encourage you, if you're a listener and you enjoy, if you get something out of it, $1 a month makes a difference. It helps me pay for hosting. It helps keep me going and make it possible for me to keep doing this. I'm hoping that if I can grow in 2021 my patron community of support, that I can do some things to grow the podcast a little bit. One of my goals is to upgrade equipment. I record this with a USB mic on my work laptop, and I do my best to make it sound as good as it can. But some better equipment would help me be able to make the podcast sound great. It would help me be able to edit and do the work for the podcast a little faster. And it would help me be able to do some of the things that I really haven't had the time to do, like transcripts for all my episodes and things like that. I want to make sure I'm making the podcast accessible to everybody. So, I have a goal of raising monthly support. And once it gets to, my goal is if I can raise $500 a month, it feels like a lot. I hate asking for money, but I could, get the equipment that I need to do that and improve the podcast. And it would also be a chance for me to do some new content for patrons. Right now, when you become a patron, you get access to the Facebook group. That's patron only, and I invite our guests to join that group, and you can ask them questions about episodes, and I do posts on their episode and try to kick things off, and that's been really cool, and I'd like for that to be something that more people can access and be a part of. That's a perk. You get all of our episodes a week early, so when I moved to doing episodes every other week, I know I don't think anybody was suffering, but I thought that was a way to help people who really listen every week and love getting new content be able to have a little bit more content along with the regular release dates. And then, I would be able to do some new things. I'm open to ideas, but one idea is to do some episodes with patrons where I talk to the people who support the show, doing some content that's just for patrons, and providing more of that. I'd love to do, I really love the mask that I created. If you saw on social media, I created a mask that has the show title, "We Don't Talk About That," with duct tape crossed so that it looks like you're kind of duct taping your mouth, and it says, "We Don't Talk About That." I don't know that that's really promoting the show too much. I think it's kind of funny and cool, and for a mask that you're putting on over your face, it looks kind of weird and interesting, and Nobody's asked me about mine yet, and nobody else has bought one. But it is my favorite mask, not because it has the podcast name on it, but because it fits the best. But I like the idea of doing some fun, kind of weird, subversive things with some merch that you can buy. And hopefully, if the Patreon grows, I'd be able to do more of that as well. But the number one thing for me with this podcast is that I want to make it sustainable. That's why I moved to doing episodes every other week, knowing that I had a lot going on, and that's proved to be a good pattern for me. I'm glad that this December for Christmas, I got to give you guys some extra content, but doing episodes every other week really is just doable and sustainable, and I can keep doing that into the future. So, so that is the state of the podcast 2020. Thank you all so much for listening. Thanks for supporting this. Thanks to all my patrons. It's been super fun, and I hope to keep doing it, and I hope that it is helpful in some way, and I hope that you'll help us grow in 2021. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy everything, and I hope that everyone has a great 2021. Thanks. Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram with the handle @WDTAT Podcast. You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to Hope Fellowship Mennonite Church for their generous support of the podcast. Also, many thanks to Neil Curran and Infielder for the use of their music. You can find more of their music online at infielder.bandcamp.com. Until next time, keep showing up and keep being brave.
What are you gonna do?
Que vaya bien.
A That's Not Canon Productions podcast.